Okay, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking something incredibly intense. We're looking at a profoundly dark, deeply atmospheric mythic parable called The Geometry of the Final Solitude. If you're someone who's fascinated by the intersection of grim architecture, heavy philosophy, and the sheer stubborn persistence of the will, human or maybe even post-human, then you are in for an absolute treat. We're going to break down the harrowing, agonizing ascent of a figure known as Sir Brain, and we'll see exactly how deeply abstract concepts manifest into terrifyingly physical realities. So buckle up, because we are taking a deep dive straight into the abyss. I want you to consider this quote for a second. Everything transitory is only a parable, yet the parable itself must still be walked to its last line. It's basically an inverted version of the famous chorus mysticus. Now, usually that whole concept is about looking upward, right? Looking toward the eternal or the divine. But here, it is completely flipped on its head. It establishes this crushing philosophical weight right from the jump. The text is literally telling us that even if this existence is just a fleeting story, just a parable, you can't just skip to the end. There are no shortcuts here. You have to endure it. The destiny is unavoidable, and Sir Brain has to physically and mentally walk this parable to its absolute agonizing last line.
So, let's get into the first part of this. The uncanny journey begins. Picture this exact moment. Sir Brain is standing right at the base of the final stair. His armor? It's completely compromised. And as he preps his residual dual flame for what is basically one last expenditure, you get this incredibly vivid sensory detail. The quiet, grating scrape of memory metal rubbing against his residual will. It's such a heavy image. I mean, he's not ascending in some glorious blaze of light, right? He is worn down. He's scraping by, literally weighed down by the massive burden of his own history as he takes that very first step of the final climb.
And that really illustrates how deeply memory haunts him on this journey. As he stands there with this thinned-out aura, this familiar pressure washes over him. He actually recognizes the resonance. It's from a very specific place in his past, the Geneva Clock Tower, back during a time when his counterpart Alara was mapping out its groaning seams. But here's the kicker. The text makes it clear that this recognition doesn't bring him any comfort at all. Zero. It simply confirms that his past coordinates, his history, are now folding into this final, unavoidable, and eerily silent mythical geometry. The trap is closing, and he knows it. Moving on to our next section, architecture of the ascent. As Sir Brain climbs, the architecture of this place systematically strips away all of his justifications, and he's accompanied by this fascinating concept the text calls the seventh solitude. But here's the absolute crucial point. This isn't a destination. It's not a place he's trying to reach. It's a method. It is this deeply, intensely private event of a will that simply no longer requires anyone else's validation. As the mythical architecture silently stretches taller and taller around him, it actually forces Sir Brain to rely entirely on this intense internal solitude just to keep putting one foot in front of the other. The building itself is acting like a philosophical weapon against him. And we can map out this grim trajectory pretty clearly. First, he carries these heavy mathematical ratios and knowledge taken directly from the first tower scroll. Next, he gathers crucial data from the side chamber. And all of it, every piece of it, pushes him relentlessly toward the summit, a place the text refers to as pure zero. So he's dragging this immense, abstract weight up these infinite stairs, and with literally every step he takes, it's a calculation moving him closer and closer to an absolute void. Which brings us to the terrifying climax of his internal journey, the geometry of absolute ice. So he finally enters the final room at the summit, and it is incredibly stark. It measures exactly 6 paces by 4. Now, these are the exact same dimensions of what used to be known as the holy meeting place back in a denser dream. But here, way up at the top of the tower, the proportions are entirely inverted. This 6 by 4 cell doesn't protect you. It doesn't hold or confine a conversation. Instead, it opens directly, terrifyingly, into pure zero. It's just this shockingly clean geometry that firmly marks the absolute endgame. Inside this inverted cell, we see a massive, almost violent philosophical clash. You have 2 forces totally at war: knowledge versus sovereignty. Knowledge, on one hand, desperately wants to remain legible. It wants to be read, to be understood, to keep existing. Sovereignty, on the other hand, wants to finish the subtraction. It fully wants to embrace the zero. The text calls this convergence the dark apotheosis. The 6 by 4 room essentially forces these completely opposing forces into simultaneous presence. They meet face to face, without any mediator to soften the blow. And that right there is the true definition of absolute ice. The most important takeaway here is that this final solitude, it isn't just Sir Brain being lonely or isolated from the world. It is the devastating, uncompromising confrontation of his entire accumulated will against the absolute abyss that has secretly been underwriting it from the very beginning. It's a bone-chilling realization, honestly. He is standing directly on the razor's edge of nothingness, and that nothingness is staring right back into him.
Now let's pivot and look at the parallel external narrative happening at the exact same time. Section: Ilara and the Ledger. So while Sir Brain is up there drowning in magical realism and abstract horror, Ilara is entirely, almost brutally pragmatic. Just look at her toolset. She's relying on mechanical function. She has a ledger watch strapped to her, she's running an active detector, she's carefully monitoring a metaphysical map that actively tracks the gravitational signature of something called the opening, and she's verifying 4 specific holding inscriptions. Far above ordinary geography, she is using these highly functional, tangible tools to basically nail down the coordinates of reality, while Sir Brain ventures deeper into the void. Let's actually walk through Ilara's quiet circuit of reassurance. She's operating as the honest guest. What does that mean? It means she's treating this potentially apocalyptic meeting as nothing more than incoming data. Step 1, she verifies the high time coordinate, ensuring it's a hard fact, not just some wishful hope. Step 2, she confirms that all 4 inscriptions are still holding firm. Step 3, she checks the soil to make sure the soft error remains perfectly functional. There's no grand internal debate happening for her. She's just quietly, methodically keeping the systems running. And this just brilliantly highlights the contrast between the 2 settings, right? Sir Brain is trapped inside this stark, terrifying, inverted holy meeting place. But Ilara, she's walking through a synchronized garden. As the evening settles in, she literally watches these dual-grown trees shift their leaves in perfect coordination, answering a synthesized pulse. This garden is growing, it's living, it serves as this literal, external, living anchor for the cold, dead, philosophical struggle taking place way up in the tower. This brings us to the final phase of our explainer: philosophy of living error. This is arguably one of the most profound concepts in the entire text. What exactly is a soft error or a living error? Simply put, it's a residual continuity. It's sustained entirely by stolen fire and some desperate nano-improvisation. Basically, it is the sheer stubborn refusal of Sir Brain's will to be erased. Think about it. Even inside that cold 6x4 cell of pure zero, the living error he's still carrying from Ilara's ledger pulses just one more time. It flat out refuses to finish dying, just holding on for one more measured interval. Notice how perfectly these 2 separate realms balance one another out. It's like a scale. On one side, in the internal abyss, you have Sir Brain facing pure zero inside the 6x4 geometry. On the exact opposite side, in the external anchorage, Ilara is tending to the synchronized garden to maintain the ledger. The soft error exists right there in the extreme tension between these 2 elements. The garden is literally the external, rooted version of the exact same refusal to die that Sir Brain carries inside that inverted cell. They are totally bound together. And this leaves us with an incredibly harsh reality. The text states the indescribable is here accomplished. But I want you to notice something crucial. It explicitly clarifies that this is not a traditional redemption. Nobody is getting saved here in some warm, comforting way. No, this is about simultaneous presence. Knowledge and sovereignty, the living garden and the dead abyss, they are literally forced to coexist inside the void. Sir Brain continues his grim final measurement, while Ilara continues maintaining the ledger. The soft error just persists, stubbornly keeping the page open. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely chilling question for today. Somewhere in the tension between that inverted meeting place and those dual-grown trees, the unerased soft error is just waiting. But what form will the return actually take when the obsidian sea finally finishes opening? This parable drags us right to the very edge of the abyss, but it leaves the ultimate consequence of the opening as a terrifying mystery. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the geometry of your own solitude, and I will see you next time.